Chainsaw Massacre and American Werewolf in London and The Howling and all that kind of stuff. So very, very late 70s, early 80s horror was absolutely where I keyed into it.
Great. I'm hearing a lot of stories about those early experiences of things maybe a bit too young, but nonetheless very exciting. Raw.
Yeah, I had the same, I guess. I had a 14-inch TV in my room, so I could watch. My parents wouldn't see what I watched, and on NRK, like the Norwegian broadcasting channel, they had night cinema. It was called. It was like at 11 at night they would show a movie, and then I remember I saw The Omen with the sound turned off, so that my parents wouldn't catch me, and like seeing the priest get impaled by that. That really.
Were they censored?
No, I don't think
Lucky.
so. Yeah.
The head spinning on the glass.
Yeah, that's
love
great.
that.
Yeah, so I think that like really like lit some the interest for horror in me, and then later, you know, Evil Dead, Reanimator, the early Peter Jackson stuff was really inspiring. When I started making my first shorts, they were a lot reminiscent of those movies. Yeah.
And I remember we were trying to do sound mix, and someone came in and said, this has happened, and we all gradually shifted through into the next room where the TV was on, and then at the end of the day, we left and walked out into an empty London, and I'll never forget that. It was so
Like 28 days later.
It was so disconcerting. It was just like a few of us walking the streets, and so that was, but that didn't obviously affect that film per se. And then the next one I did had nothing to do with it, but and I suppose I went the opposite direction of trying to be escapist from what was really going on in the world. But yeah, how it affected us all. I don't know. As I say, for me, it drove me to kind of not deal with that kind of stuff within my movies because I wanted movies to be escapist.
Which is also a response, of course, that sense that things have gone in a particular direction. Again, it's fascinating you talk about that moment, which I think many will remember vividly, and I think a horror movie and a news story can do that. It can freeze you in time, and you can feel that response.
Horror is always reflective. There's a great documentary, you guys remember American Nightmares? It's this great documentary that pinpointed all of the major things that happened in the 70s and 80s, everything from the Vietnam War to the advent of AIDS, and how films, like especially horror films, reflected them. And when you look at the 90s, we were at a time, from Scream on, where we were almost kind of postmodern, where now we're commenting on it. There was a complacency to horror, and there wasn't anything that we, I guess, could comment on. And then when you're watching the most horrific images, I'll never forget watching someone come home. I was living in Queens, so I went home and I watched a man walk home in ash. There's nothing more fucked up and disturbing than that this person was wearing another person. And it makes, from a horror standpoint, and this sounds totally selfish, but you're sitting there going, I'm storing that away for later. Because it's those kind of images that you want to have people be affected by.
A scene can be set in what it might take a writer, pages to write about in words. So I think as you have all made some very interesting films that have made use of setting, you might like to talk a little about that. I think of everything from, dark, spooky spaces to the wilderness spaces, to the idea of the backwoods. These are important aspects of horror, I think.
I mean, we're sitting with the man that made the most claustrophobic movie of all time, right? Like, the thing that I love the most about The Descent is that there could have been a version of that movie that didn't have any creatures at all, and it would have been just as equally terrifying. And then you ramp it up with those little assholes, which was great. But like, you couldn't tell that story without that location. You're right, like it became so important to the storytelling, to the atmosphere, to the tension. Like, how did you find that space? I know I'm stealing from a Q&A question that you're going to be saying later.
Answering this later on. In what sense? How did I find the cave?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
we very quickly concluded that if we were going to try and film that in a real cave, we all would have died. And we never would have found the cave that fit the script, like with specific locations, unless we went to 15 different caves, and then we would have died lots of times.
But in that case, when you're talking about location, like you crafted how it was going to unfold.
Yeah.
And and sometimes, and Roar, I'm curious with you as well, like, sometimes we're kind of given a space and you go. Like for me with Wrong Turn 2, the original one, the original one I believe was shot in Toronto. These are all supposed to be the backwoods of Virginia, which I'm not allowed to go to in Virginia because people hate me that I've made them all look like cannibalistic hillbilly mutants. They're all very nice people. They only inbreed sometimes. But like I was told we were going to shoot in Vancouver, and to me, Vancouver has a very particular look. And I have been called out many times, excuse me, sir, that foliage is not indicative of Virginia, or West Virginia. I'm like, fuck, man, that's the only location I had, But in most cases, we're given these locations for the most part, and then you're told, make it scary. And like the biggest challenge for me was I shot it all during the day, and the forest during the day is not as scary as the forest at night, and how do you generate fear and tension and suspense using a location that is kind of against you in a way?
Well, when I did the pilot for Constantine, the whole concept was like I wanted to do the French Connection with demons. It was going to be filmed in New York. I wanted to go down all the dingy New York alleyways, shoot it like the French Connection, Friedkin style, but add demons in. I wanted it grey and rainy and bleak. And they're like, we're not going to film it there, we're going to film it in Atlanta in the summertime. And it's going to be sunny and bright and everything's going to be new and shiny. I was like, oh God, that's just not...
And then they said, what's the French Connection?
So like, it's not the look that I'm after. So yeah, you do have to just like work around that absolutely all the time. One of the things I have with my early films is, in the UK, there's not an awful lot, it's not like Norway, there's not an awful lot of wilderness. And a lot of great horror movies are set in like isolated places. So unless you go to Scotland, there is no wilderness. So that's why Dog Soldiers is set in Scotland, not in Sussex, where there is no wilderness. So it made sense for that. And then several of my movies are set in Scotland, even if I didn't film there, because you just end up filming where you go.
I want to mention one more thing with location. One thing that definitely changed in the 2000s that we never had to deal with before was cell phones.
Oh,
Hello.
hello. How do you feel about the anniversary?
Old. It's 20 years. The film hasn't aged a day, but I have. But mostly I just feel incredibly humbled that anybody's even still talking about it, let alone coming to see it in a place like this. It's astonishing, so I'm very, very proud.
I think I was probably in elementary school when the movie was released in the
Don't say
morning.
that.
So it's a very precious childhood memory for me.
That's great. I like to know that I'm tormenting children with this film. It's great. Creating new horror directors and new horror fans with child trauma. Fabulous. It's a great idea. Might be annoying during the film though.
It is turned off headlamps. Yeah, I was at the panel, and just a little recap from one of the questions. How many actual caves were used during the screening or the production?
Well, should I say that now? I think it's a bit of a giveaway. Should we save that till afterwards?
You can if you want, but I think it's one of those questions that might give a new insight.
Oh, we'll give
People
people a
have
new
seen
yeah.
movie
Well,
1,000 times.
Yeah, the insight is pretty simple. That there isn't a single real cave in the whole movie.
And just a last question, so you can answer more questions after the movie. I think it's better to be enjoyed doing as little as possible. But I want to ask, how many of the cast members are actually claustrophobic as well?
Well, I think they all are now. I don't know. I think some of them suffered a little bit for sure, but definitely a post-trauma of Megan's film didn't help. Yeah.
So, if anyone has any questions for Neil after the movie, remember to stay for the Q&A.
Hi, thank you for an awesome screening. I work with sound design, and I think this movie is very sound-driven, especially in the dark and quiet scenes. So how did you work with the sound design to make this claustrophobic intense?
We had a fantastic, so my editor, John Harris, had just worked with these two guys that set up a small company in London called Phase, and he suggested they should do it, and I mean, they did an amazing job. We worked very closely with them to come up with the sound effects for the crawlers and things like that. Actually, it's an old friend of mine who did a lot of the vocalizations for the crawlers. Yeah, just the whole using the cave and the echoes and the drips and all that kind of atmosphere that we could pile in there. But yeah, we caught those guys early when they were nice and cheap, because now they do things like Gladiator 2 and stuff like that. I mean, they're huge, but back then it was like one of their first or second features, so yeah, they did an amazing job. Because I'd done Dog Soldiers beforehand and done, you know, creature suits and stilts and all that kind of stuff, and it was a real pain in the ass. Trying to do something like that again, I just had no interest in that at that point. So I wanted to do something much more humanoid, and I was heavily inspired by obviously things like Nosferatu and I remember the Master from Salem's Lot. I wanted to make something just fleshy and bald and slimy and horrible. But then, you know, within the context of the story, the point is they're meant to be human. They're meant to be they're the cavemen who stayed in the cave, and so they evolved in the dark. So when most of humanity left the cave, the Slot stayed in and went deeper. And so they were meant to. We took Paul Hyatt to design them. We sort of thought, well, what might happen to them in evolution of like learning to adapt in the dark, losing their eyesight, using their hearing and their smell instead, and things like that. So that was the plan. Thank you.
When you were designing the light and everything like that, like, it's a really beautiful movie in terms of light and dark. There's a lot of negative space. What were some of the challenges to really try to capture that kind of lighting and claustrophobia?
The challenges were when I was talking to Sam, my DP, like a year at least before we made it, was that they set in the challenge, and it was part of the script, was that I didn't want to light the cave with anything other than the characters took with them. Because that's what real caving's like. And you know, I had been caving as research for the film, and you know, when you go down there and like your lights go out, that's it. There's nothing else. There's no beautiful shafts of light to make your caves look pretty, like I've seen in a lot of other cave movies or cave sequences in movies. So I set myself some rules about doing that. There are a couple of scenes where we had to break those rules just out of necessity, that the light source we had just wasn't quite enough to see what was going on, and there's complex things going on. So, but with a couple of exceptions, we stuck to that rule. So the actors were constantly lighting themselves. So rather than have lights in the cave, we'd have reflector boards, just a piece of white board next to the camera or something. So whenever the actors shine a torch on it, that would bounce back on them. And off the walls of the cave, because they were very wet, so that reflected light. But I also wanted there to be like huge areas of the screen to be pitch black and not be able to see what was going on. I just thought it's a better way to hide the fear. It's just trying to, you're obviously just trying to catch the audience unawares, but you know, you're dealing with an audience like yourselves who are, you know, very familiar with horror films, know all the tricks of, you know, what's going to do it, and somehow trying to go to the next level of like, okay, we'll not do it where it's obvious, and then we'll try and just delay it a little bit, and then we'll try and, when they think it's going to come because it's not so obvious, then we'll still not do it, and then we'll go again, and then, you know, try and drag it out as long as possible before you finally deliver it. Or you just throw one in there where it's totally not expected at all, like the pole coming through the window. I mean, that one works really well because you're just not expecting that at that point. But in the caves, you're expecting something scary. The guy in the infrared, when you first see the crawler standing behind her, I mean, with that one, it was just, we rehearsed it a few times, we did a few versions of the shot, and the first couple of times, I had him standing behind her, kind of like reaching toward her, and every time I saw it, I just thought, it looked funny, it looked comedic. And then so the last time I said, just stand behind her, and just kind of like tilt your head, and just look a bit dim, and listen like you're listening to them. And we did that, and as soon as I saw it, it was just like, ooh, that's weird. And that's the one that's in the movie. It works so well.
I was curious, I love the way they're shot and edited, the intense sequences with the creatures, and I was curious if you storyboarded them in detail, or if it was something you figured out along the way.
No, we storyboarded the whitewater rafting sequence, and I think it was like one of the sequences, well, maybe the crossing the chasm sequence, but the rest I wasn't. I mean, partly because we ran out of money for the storyboard artist, and the other one was the end fight sequence when it's the 2 girls and the 3 crawlers. Like, we had half a day to shoot that entire fight. I mean, we ran out of time, so a lot of it was winging it, and so there was no time for storyboards or something like that. It was just working out with the stunt team and then just doing it. Yeah, but I didn't really shop this either. It was just I had a pretty strong. I knew from the script. The script was very visual, and we followed it almost in linear order as well. We managed to shoot once we got into the caves and on the sets. We were shooting the whole thing in story order, which was really useful. So yeah, so I didn't do so much storyboarding.
Worked out amazing anyways, so.
Thank you.
One more question from me before we leave the auditorium. So what's next? Are you working on anything exciting at the moment?
A number of projects. I'm developing some action movies with JD, who's my action movie business partner, and then I've got another couple of horror things on the go. An alien invasion thing that I'm doing. So yeah, trying to keep busy.
Very exciting.
Don't know which one's going to be next though. You never can tell.
Yeah, they all say that. So I hope you continue making great films, and I hope to see you back at Ramaskrik in the future. Thank you so
very much.
for coming.
Thank you.